Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar to discuss the best strategies to get started and to get the most out of Office 365. So before we dive right into the content, I wanted to just go over a little housekeeping with all of you. So thank you for joining. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation. So there is a Q&A chat as part of the GoToWebinar interface that you can interact with us and you can leave your questions, and as they come in, we're going to try and tackle them. So it's not too jam-packed with too much content that I don't think that we can take a few questions and make sure that we're helping you all get what you want to get out of today's session. And with that, we're also recording this session, so it will be available on our site a little later today in case you would like to share or reference anything that we share in this presentation earlier. So we'll send a follow-up email with the information on how you can access the deck, how you can access the recording, and we'll also follow up on any questions that we are not able to cover in the time on air. So with that, we will go ahead and begin our program. And I will start off by introducing myself. I'm Jill Hanneman. I am the Director of Advisory Services at Portal Solutions. I've been with Portal now for about 4 years and have been working in the capacity of an account manager, SharePoint, information architect, and overall lover of SharePoint. So I started working with SharePoint with Moss 2007, and I really came to learn about SharePoint and want to start using SharePoint mainly for its information management capabilities. So I have a background in knowledge management, and my interests are always really in how we can work better to improve knowledge retention, improve findability, improve reuse of information. And I believe that the technology in SharePoint and how it's evolved over the years have really been a very nice platform to enable a lot of organizations to achieve some very significant results. So I also edit our Digital Workplace Today blog. So hopefully if you do not already subscribe to our blog, you can as a result of this webinar. But not only am I an author on the blog, but a number of our other experts within Portal Solutions and the occasional guest speaker will make an appearance on our blog to share some really valuable insights on what is happening in the industry with SharePoint, technically from a user experience standpoint, and just overall strategy on how to realize your business objectives and goals. I also really love food. So for anyone who has ever seen me speak before, I'm usually working on some kind of food project. So I not only like to eat it, but I also like to make it. And so I'm working on some cinnamon rolls and trying to improve my dough, the consistency, the overall flavor, gooiness of them. And so I typically work on savory things, but now taking a little turn into something sweet. So far the project is going well. I'll continue to update you guys on my progress there. So I kind of want to just set a primer as we get into this conversation on how we can get the most out of Office 365. We're kind of making the assumption with this presentation that you all have a basic understanding of what Office 365 is. So I'm not going to go too deep into what is Office 365, what is the cloud, what is Microsoft's public cloud. We're going to focus a little bit more in diving deeper into what each of the components are of Office 365, how they overlap, why some of them might be a little bit confusing, and then starting to think about, what might be a really good use case for some of these different tools. So to prime this conversation and to start thinking about what it is that we would want Office 365 to do, I kind of ask you to think about what are some of your drivers to moving to Office 365. Are you coming Office 365 from a SharePoint instance? Are you all moving to take advantage of the OneDrive for Business large data file storage capabilities? Are you looking to adopt Exchange in the cloud, email in the cloud? So whatever it is, there are a host of different reasons for file sharing, availability, improving collaboration, improving knowledge transfer and knowledge retention. The Office 365 has a really great argument to reduce your IT maintenance as well, to provide mobile capabilities to your users, or just to provide search. There are a lot of reasons, and there are also a lot of tools within Office 365 that can provide the same capabilities. So I want to take a minute and just kind of examine and take a look at what Office 365 is made of. So again, I'm not going to go into too much depth here, but I think that it's really important to note the ecosystem that is Office 365. So essentially, this entire brown slide and everything on it is the Office 365 ecosystem. And at the heart of it, at the very bottom, what we've got are our 3 services that are primarily running Office 365. So Office 365 was built upon the services provided from SharePoint, from Skype, and also from Exchange. So those 3 being kind of the core features or the core services that Microsoft has been able to leverage in order to develop these different apps, to develop these different applications that have made these services that much more consumable, align those services much more to different use cases that we may want to use in our business. What I like also about this is that it kind of depicts that Office Graph search layer. And Office Graph is the machine learning capability that is fueling and running Delve. So Office Graph is that layer that's basically analyzing the actions that you're taking, the items that you're interacting with, the different users that you're also interacting with. And with the Office Graph API, you're also able to develop some very cool search algorithms to identify and highlight different actions and information that you may want to surface. So we have our 3 services. We have Office Graph as kind of our search machine learning layer. And then above that, with our applications and our apps, we have different consumption methods in order to interact with these different services. So it's quite an interesting look at how Office 365 is organized, how it's made up, what it's made of, and how we kind of interact with it. But I also want to look at these items a different way. So thinking more in business terms about how we interact and collaborate with our colleagues. Because at the end of the day, this is really about collaboration, right? We are trying to figure out ways to improve the ease with which we're able to work with our colleagues, our ability to share information with our colleagues, share our knowledge with our colleagues, find information a lot more easily, and to ultimately reduce the amount of time that we spend doing a lot of these things during our day. So this is what I like to call our collaboration spectrum. So at the bottom we've got the range with which we're interacting with different people in our company, different people we're interacting with. So we can exchange information with one another on an individual basis. We can also exchange information with one another at the enterprise level. Somewhere in the middle there is, the team idea, where we're interacting with specialized project teams or we're interacting with our department. On the left, on the vertical, what we've got are the different types of content that we interact with on a daily basis as well. So ranging from temporary to record. And so you can see up at the upper left-hand corner in the individual temporary area, we've got instant messaging. And so instant messaging is really, very temporary. I could be IMing Josh to say, hey, Josh, you want to go grab a sandwich for lunch? Are you ready to go for lunch? And so that's definitely an item that doesn't need to be retained. It doesn't really need to be found again, and it's a one-to-one kind of exchange. The other end of the spectrum, we have enterprise and we have record. And that really kind of highlights any documents or records management that needs to be retained for the organization and has some, and probably has some compliance measures built in around that. And those could be the corporate policies. Those could be our standard operating procedures. Those could also be personally identifiable information. So information that must be treated a different way that's shared across the enterprise that needs that may manage some sensitivity. So what we have in the middle, and I really like how this is kind of depicted. What we have in the middle are email, social, team sites, and intranet, and kind of the stratus of the different ways that we're exchanging information. Email, for a lot of organizations, this bar may actually span the entire length of the table. So it may go from individual to enterprise. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best usage of email because, you know, we've all lost attachments. We've all lost information in email. Or, you know, using email as a record management can be very cumbersome and not necessarily any more secure than working in any other platform. So, you know, we're finding that email is not the answer for that bar being our collaboration spectrum. So then what we put in place, we've got, you know, different tools to allow us to share information, and that's kind of that social bar, not intended to be social per se, but intended to provide that transparency layer of sharing information between different teams and individuals. And then moving down to team sites and talking about having your corporate intranet. So what we kind of see here then is between social, team sites, and intranet, we have a lot of overlap. A lot of overlap with functionality, a lot of overlap with what tools do we use to facilitate these types of information sharing and information exchange. So now that we have kind of talked about, you know, the different ways we collaborate, the different ways we work with one another, I think it's kind of really important to note that there are a number of things in Office 365 that seem to do very similar things. So we've got SharePoint, and you know, for the most part, I think, you know, a majority of us know SharePoint. We know what it is. We know what it does. It's very familiar to us. But then we have Yammer, and so the question becomes, how do we then use Yammer? And now with OneDrive for Business. OneDrive for Business, incredibly powerful. It's become, in fact, actually the #1 reason why a lot of consumers and customers are moving to Office 365 because of that very powerful 1 terabyte of content storage. And then you've got groups now. So how does a group relate to Yammer? How does it relate to SharePoint? Again, Yammer has groups. Now we have a separate entity, a separate app called Groups. How do these all overlap? And then we're going to eventually see Infopedia, the NextGen Portals that Microsoft is going to be coming out with. How will this play into the overall equation of how we use these products? Should we be waiting until Infopedia comes out before we move forward and start building something on SharePoint? So there are a lot of questions, and you know, I've been trying to figure this out as well. You know, what should we be using what tool for? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And so that's really kind of the crux of this conversation for me. You know, in thinking through what my experience has been in using the products as a user, as well as leveraging these products with a lot of our customers and hearing their use cases and figuring out what it is that they're trying to do with these different products. So, so that's really what we're going to be discussing for the rest of this conversation. We're going to be kind of hitting on some governance and, you know, creating the roles and responsibilities of these different pieces within Office 365. But we're also going to talk about the pros and cons of each of those tools And I'm going to try to, share with you some of the analysis that I've made in leveraging groups, in leveraging SharePoint, to help give you some guidance as to what appropriate usage might be for these different tools, so you can help your organizations figure out what might be the best tool to use in what situation. So we're going to take a quick look here. I was looking to see if we got any questions. No questions yet, so we will continue on. So the first thing that I'd like to say, as part of creating your governance and trying to figure out this plan is, when you're looking at Office 365, I think coming up with a governance plan is going to be very different than what we've discussed previously with SharePoint, because it's not just about setting up SharePoint governance anymore. It's really about figuring out how to best leverage all of the really powerful tools that you're getting with Office 365. So the first step that I really believe in this conversation that needs to take place is that conversation around creating the role and responsibilities for each of the different items within Office 365. And so the rest of this conversation will focus on kind of the pros and cons to help you figure out what you want to align these different tools with. But, having a very simple statement to say, OneDrive for Business is intended for intended to be the location where users will store their content. And this is where they will keep the documents that they are working on and are in progress, and for their eyes only. It can also be a place where they're sharing the one-off document with a colleague or with someone outside of their organization. And then with sites, we can say sites and SharePoint, we can say, this is where I store my documents for my team or my project. This is where documents are stored that I publish for use by the rest of the company. So now you kind of have that intranet use case, you kind of have that team site or project site use case involved here as well. And then with Yammer, we can say we don't store documents in Yammer. We don't want to use Yammer for document storage. But this is where I can create a link and I can send a message to a team or to a wider audience about some interesting information that I've either created or maybe I've found. So I think coming up with a very simple use case for how your users are intended to use each of these different pieces is a really important point in kind of clarifying those roles and responsibilities. So as you further dive into developing your governance strategy for your Office 365 environment, your tenant, we also want to try and make sure that we're covering all of those different items and we're highlighting the strengths of why we put governance plans in place in the first place. So we kind of just talked about governance roles and responsibilities. I think it's more so than just saying, you've got a content administrator, you've got site owners. I think that that's all really important and still needs to occur, but having the designation of what each tool is to be used for within your organization is really important to making sure that folks understand what they're supposed to use these tools for. And also maybe if there's any distinction around where certain types of content, records, more sensitive pieces of content can be stored. I think that that's also very important as well. So when we're coming up with our governance plans, so these are what I consider to be my 4 pillars to governance. I believe that this is a really great framework as you're coming up with your governance strategy for Office 365. To start off with your value statement. And your value statement can also be where you're defining those roles and responsibilities for each of the different items within Office 365. But you can say that, OneDrive for Business is intended for, document storage, we've got some information management policies aligned there. Yammer, you don't put, you wouldn't put any documents in there, but this is where you can, share information. You can send links. You can ask questions. And then SharePoint's where you have, team sites and project sites, and your intranet might be hosted there too. Your roles and responsibilities are more so what I consider to be the typical kind of governance plan, saying, and identifying your executive sponsors, who are your, SharePoint admin, your Office 365 admin, for that matter, trainers, any site owners, and also what your responsibility is as a user, especially now that you have the ability to maybe create groups or you have the ability to manage your own OneDrive. And then policies and procedures are where you kind of set the rules of the road. So how and when you can create a group, how and when you can create a new site, any site templates, page layout requirements, and that's how you manage the sprawl and manage the usage of all of the different components. And then the last piece is often the piece that I think gets often overlooked, but this is really our communication and education. So as you might be rolling out Office 365, this is a great place to start engaging your users and letting them know that you guys are going to be moving to the cloud. You're going to be engaging this new service called Office 365. And here's kind of the roadmap of how each of these different features might be introduced or rolled out to your user base. And then also having a training plan in place to educate your users at a number of different levels and training them in context to the role that you're asking them to play within the environment. I think that that's really critical. So if you are asking folks to be site owners, giving them training on being a site owner, everyone should receive OneDrive for Business training. Everyone should receive Skype for Business training, and more elevated training for anyone who might have greater responsibilities. So along with your communication and education, managing for change is also really important, really critical to this whole equation. And this is, again, I think the difference between having successful adoption and having the ability to measure ROI and a return against this investment into Office 365 is making sure that you are managing for change and you're taking a baseline before you roll this out, and you're able to capture some metrics afterward. So again, when you're kind of managing or you're kind of measuring your ROI with Office 365, there can be some really tangible dollar value return metrics. But unless your users are using it, it may not necessarily make a huge impact. So when you're looking at capturing the softer ROI, might be more in terms of time savings. And that can be a little challenging to measure sometimes, but I think it's also really important. So, when you're rolling this out and you're thinking about how to align business functions, collaborative opportunities for your organization with rolling out Office 365, looking at effectiveness, prioritization, pain points are really critical, and managing it against simplicity. So keeping your rollout simple, keeping your solutions simple are really important. So I had the opportunity to listen to John Westworth from Microsoft speak once, and he works out of the change management group out of Microsoft. And so obviously this is what he does for a living, and he studies and he works with within Microsoft to help their customers, to help customers basically manage change and gain that adoption and gain that ROI out of their tools. But he said something that I thought was really interesting. that the 20% you need to know, which will make you know more than 80% of your colleagues. And so what he's really saying here is that there's about 20% of the information. You really only need to know a small amount of information to basically target about 80% of the people that are your colleagues. You're at, in the spectrum of your colleagues. On one end, you're going to have the early adopters. You're going to have the 10% of your colleagues who will be really excited about this, who will come to every training, who will help champion this, who will become your evangelists. At the other end of the spectrum, the other 10%, you're going to have your naysayers. And you're never going to get those people. And that's essentially what he's saying. You're never going to get those folks. So you may as well stop trying to get those folks. You're never going to grab that 10%. But that 80%, there's only a small amount of information that you need to know in order to grab the attention and to work through change management with the majority of your colleagues and to get them to adopt this solution. And that's really combining a combination of effectiveness and simplicity. So this is just, really quick kind of equation to managing your communication plans in a rollout with Office 365. And, that's acknowledging the current state, acknowledging the current practices that exist, understanding what those pain points are, and then discussing in, very, very open terms what your transition state is going to look like, what interim temporary activities, your users are going to have to experience or any kind of change that they're going to have to maintain while you're going through the transition. And then introducing that future state, describing what that future state is going to look like, and also providing support, providing training, providing an improvement loop, as well as a way for folks to communicate back to you as to how they like it, what could be better about the system. Okay, so we're going to start discussing what we can do to get more out of Office 365, and we're going to start discussing some of the features. But I'm going to look really quickly, and I think that we do have a question. Do you consider pictures documents? Yammer is a great way to send a pic for discussion or to discuss a particular document asynchronously. And, I don't necessarily consider a picture a document. I think there are, definitely some great use cases in posting artifacts and leveraging Yammer to house different artifacts within Office 365. My main argument for a document in Yammer might be you don't have the change control features, the document management features in Yammer that you have in SharePoint. So version history, co-authoring, whatnot, and you don't have a lot of those features. Plus, you don't have the organizational features as well. So the ability to group content, find and leverage metadata to filter, sort content. So I don't think that Yammer should really be used as a document library. It shouldn't be a document storage mechanism. However, sharing pictures, sharing the one-off document, I don't think is really an issue. And again, I think it really comes down to the context of the usage of the group, what the business initiative or the business issues are that the group is trying to handle with that particular group in Yammer. So thank you for the question. So we're going to start focusing first on SharePoint. So SharePoint, we know, we love, we've used SharePoint for many, many years now, and SharePoint 2016 has just come out, so we are all witnessing yet another server release on premises. But for SharePoint Online, you're getting all the same great features. So site collections, sites, pages, the ability to present content and organize content hierarchically, provide security groups, manage roles, then the document management capabilities, file storage, the ability to have apps through web parts, and the usage of lists, libraries, columns, manage metadata, content types. So we have all of those rich information management features that we know, we love, the ability to host an intranet, to have that tailored and customized web-like experience for document management. So I think that there are a lot of great strengths to SharePoint, and we'll share those in a minute. But again, you know, the look and feel, SharePoint is what it is, right? We know it for what it's good to be. So on the left here, you can see we have, you know, some of the items from our collaboration spectrum. We have team sites. It's good for document records management, online storage. It also has some social capabilities to it on its own. So what I think SharePoint is good for is, I think it's great for team sites. I think it's great for project sites, team sites. I think they're familiar, they're flexible, they allow you the ability to personalize and tailor to your organization. There are the robust capabilities to allow you to manage records and to apply a records retention schedule against these electronic files. It provides you with site centers to facilitate kind of a web-like experience to information sharing, to accessing apps, and it acts in a way that, you know, we are familiar with in that concept of a portal. And it also has a really robust ecosystem of third-party products. And so that, you know, is, I think, a huge benefit to leveraging SharePoint, you know, versus some of its competition out there. Just the ecosystem of third-party add-ons is just so vast. And especially with Office 365, you know, there are opportunities, and a lot of third-party providers have made their features cloud and Office 365 ready. So what I think SharePoint isn't great for is social. And I don't think anybody would disagree with that necessarily. But the social tool set within SharePoint never really took off. And, you know, for all the different features within SharePoint that are considered social, you know, we've seen Office 365 and Microsoft come up with other alternatives for a lot of those pieces. So the newsfeed, blogs, discussion forums, discussion threads. And the look and feel is what it is. You know, I can't say enough that, you know, the first request we get when we, you know, talk to an organization about why they don't like SharePoint or what they want to be done to SharePoint, they say, we don't want it to look like SharePoint. So let's make it, you know, look better. And, you know, if you have gone custom, that can always be expensive to maintain. Okay, so moving into OneDrive for Business. OneDrive for Business is really cool, in my opinion. You know, so we've got that 1 terabyte of document storage, which in my my thought, you should never be maxing out of that 1 terabyte of document storage, unless you're, you know, you've got some really heavy image files, videos, or something along those lines. You know, no one person should have 1 terabyte of document files. You know, so all the great capabilities that you've got with SharePoint from a records management, information management availability, you can impose those same strategies within OneDrive for Business. And so this is kind of really a great alternative to anyone who has users who go out and use their own Dropbox. And they've created their own Dropbox account with their own personal emails, and they're using that as a way to share content with folks who are external, or to share large files, large size files that can't be sent through email attachment. This is a great use case because you can still manage these assets as part of your corporate policy in OneDrive for Business while providing them with very, very similar capability to then share content with external partners or share content with other folks that they work with internally. There's a lot of usability features. I think OneDrive for Business is incredibly simple to use, and it is also responsive, and it has apps that are already available. So this is just a view of my OneDrive for Business, and what I liked that it highlights is, it looks like a document library. It has the ability to allow me to organize my content in folders that I'm familiar with, that I use to organize my content with, and it shows me on the right who I may have shared content with, which is great because as you start sharing and kind of breaking permissions and inviting other people to collaborate with you, it can be really easy to lose track of who you've shared what with. And then this is just a look at the app and being able to access all of my content, whatever I need, through my mobile app on my iPhone. So for OneDrive for Business, what it's good for. I think that OneDrive for Business is great for personal file storage. So this is an excellent alternative to the G drive that was previously my own G drive, or my documents where I was just storing content locally on my PC and it wasn't getting backed up. This is excellent for that personal file storage use case. It's also intended to be a document repository, and now it's compliant, it's backed up, I have mobile accessibility, I can access it from any device, anywhere, without being on my particular machine, and I can, still share that information and collaborate with different individuals, within my company or outside. And I can also access my group's collaboration in this as well. So what I don't think it's good for is it's not really an answer to team collaboration. So it's not really the hub for a department to store all their collected documents for. So you may have your personal G drive, but your N drive, the drive that everyone uses or each department has their own directory in, it's not really that other team file share drive. So your team collaboration really needs to be occurring probably somewhere else. And reasons for that, you send links to individuals. It's really challenging, and it can be difficult to revisit some documents that people are sharing with you. There's also no calendaring or other features really associated with it. So from a team perspective, it's not really very strong. It really is very strong in the personal file storage department. I think I saw another question come in. So the question is, I thought Microsoft removed the metadata schemas from OneDrive. Aren't these just folders now? So actually, you can enable metadata schemas to be applied. So it's a setting. It doesn't come out of the box already configured that way, but you can enable a setting that will allow you to leverage, manage metadata, and allow you to set information management policies on OneDrive. So Yammer. Yammer, the social networking, social enterprise tool that comes a part of Office 365. So it looks, very much like a Facebook, LinkedIn kind of newsfeed interface, and that's really what it's intended to do, be a newsfeed, a discussion thread, if you will, a discussion forum, and organize in groups within Yammer that you can subscribe to, follow, and make private or public. And then there's also a really handy app that allows you to make posts when you're on your mobile device, check and see what's going on, and see what your colleagues have posted to you. And Yammer is not intended to bring Facebook to your enterprise. It's not intended necessarily to help make your individuals within your organization more social with one another. What I like it for, I think, Yammer is really awesome for improving transparency within the organization and putting conversations in context with content. So, one of the ways that we use Yammer is for information or questions that we have for one another as consultants, problems that we're trying to solve. It could be really easy for us to just in an email like one or two of our colleagues, to ask them, hey, what would you do for this scenario? But the problem with that is that, that information is only going to those two individuals that you're sending the email to. That information is then going to get lost in an email thread, and in no way will that information, that potentially very valuable discussion, get shared with the rest of the company or the rest of the people on that team who practice a similar discipline. By putting it on Yammer, not only will you be able to target those two people who you're looking to help for help and help provide you with an answer, but it might enable someone else to be able to learn from the same question or the same answers that other people are posting. So with Yammer, I actually am able to learn quite a bit more from my colleagues just through that transparency of discussion that we've got. Other reasons why Yammer is really good is that it's really easy to use, and people get the user interface. It's very visual, it's very responsive, it's very intuitive. So getting users to adopt it is very simple. But I think the one thing about adoption of what it's not good for is that you are asking users to start checking another thing, yet another thing. And so they're already checking their email. You're going to ask them to check, Yammer now, their Yammer feed. You're going to ask them to check, whatever other system notifications that they're a part of. And so without a solid business case, without some real driver around why they need Yammer in order to do their job, adoption can fail. Another thing that we've noticed, too, is that without any leadership buy-in, adoption can also fail. So I like to say that Yammer can work for your corporate culture. It doesn't work for every corporate culture. So that's kind of one of those pieces that you need to self-reflect on and really decide if you have a good business case to apply to the information sharing and transparency that Yammer can provide. So what I mentioned before is that you can add Yammer in context to SharePoint sites, and that's where I think it can be really powerful. So in this particular instance, we've got a knowledge base, and so this is a screenshot of a knowledge base, and these different individual articles are going to help provide information to users about how they can accomplish certain tasks for this one system. So they can use the search refiners on the left to help them find information. They can view the articles in the middle to get the information they're looking for. But what I like is that they have this news feed on the right that allows them to communicate with the administrator if they have any questions about any of the articles. So, and there's a hashtag associated with each of the different articles so that the administrator always knows what it is that the question's coming in context related to. So in this kind of application, associating a Yammer feed with information, with the context of an article, for instance, or a document, can make it really powerful to capture that dialogue, that one-off exchange that someone may have about some of the content that they're working with. So that's just one of the ways that Yammer can be really maximized and applied in a very specific use case. So with regard to our groups, so groups are kind of an interesting, are a new collaborative team site object that's a part of Office 365. So I like to say that it's kind of a different take on a team site. But it's actually running off of Exchange. So the way you access your group is through your mail. On the left-hand side, there is a new grouping called Groups on your left panel, and it can allow you to create a new group from that area or access any groups that you are a part of or a member of. So what it does is a group is integrating email, files, OneNote, Link, or Skype for Business, calendaring, and also security kind of all into one. So it's a really easy way of creating an email distribution list. It's also really easy to create a new group. So we actually created a group, and we called it the Lean Team. So we were kind of working internally at ways that we could improve our delivery process. And so it had 5 members, and what the group was great for is that it created an email distribution list for us to easily send emails to one another and include everyone in the group. It allowed us to share and store files together. We had a calendar that we could set meetings and different cadence communication, set that up. And it also gave us our own OneNote notebook, which I absolutely love. So what are groups good for? Groups are really great for that team collaboration. I think that task force, projects, it ties together all the core productivity tasks for a team. It provides us with access to creating a group in Outlook. Calendaring items can show up right in our own calendars through membership and integration of those calendars. And also that shared OneNote notebook, which is really fantastic. And to also access your group files. If you think back to OneDrive for Business, there's another left-hand navigation that allows you to access the libraries for each of your different groups. So there is a nice way to manage documents and to have some navigable way of accessing the shared documents through OneDrive for Business. So what I think it's really confusing is that it's really similar to team sites in SharePoint. And one of the things that Microsoft is discussing right now is ways of synchronizing and having greater connectivity between team sites and groups. And so that's definitely something that we're going to be seeing in future iterations. Microsoft is going to be clarifying the role of groups, the role of the team site within SharePoint to help all of us understand a little bit better strengths and weaknesses. I think that this is really the most confusing part. What I don't like about the groups necessarily is that it doesn't really give you a landing page. It doesn't give you that sort of way of customizing the look and feel to really tailor the different interaction points. Kind of what you see is what you get, and the features that come with it are all that you're really getting with those. So no templating ability to really manage that. I've been saying that larger teams may not necessarily benefit from using groups. I'm actually thinking that after using it a little bit more, thinking through a couple different use cases, talking with a couple different customers, the more I've been thinking about it, I think you could use groups for larger teams or department spaces. Again, it's really in the fact that you can't template, you can't improve the look and feel necessarily, and what you see is what you get. But I do think that for larger groups and larger teams of individuals, it could definitely be a beneficial piece to use. So with our NextGen Portals, and we haven't really seen a whole lot of information coming out about the NextGen Portals. I think Microsoft has been really focusing on the 2016 on-premises release, which we just got, and they're focusing a lot of energy around that release and communication in that regard. But we haven't really heard much more about other NextGen Portal experiences coming out. So the one that we have right now is the Office 365 video, which is essentially like a YouTube channel that you get in your Office 365, allowing you the ability to store videos, video files, and to create kind of a really nice interface in allowing individuals within your company to access the videos and the content from that. So what we're going to be seeing coming up, is that Infopedia knowledge management portal. Again, we haven't heard a whole lot of information about, when those are going to be coming out. So, what I think it's going to be good for is that it will be a really nice user interface that will be responsive, that's going to give you almost like a turnkey intranet. And that's kind of the direction that I think Microsoft is going with that, to kind of create their own version of a turnkey intranet that's very flexible, that provides business savvy users the ability to manage and create their own intranet. It's going to be, I think it's going to be intended to be very cumbersome, and I think they're going to really limit capabilities of what you can customize and how you can change what comes out of the box. And I think right now what it's not good for is that I don't know a whole lot more about it, other than what they talked about over a year ago. And so we're all, I think, going to be waiting just a little bit longer to figure out a little bit more about what that's going to be. So what we didn't really cover, and what we're not really going to be covering in this conversation, will be search and delve. I think delve in and of itself is kind of a governance conversation that you should definitely be discussing with your folks. A lot of organizations I know are turning delve off, and it has kind of that internal big brother kind of aspect to it. But personally, I've found a lot of value out of delve, and the discovery of information, and the transparency of working with my colleagues and knowing about what's going on. And so for those reasons, I think I've found it very helpful, very, very productive for myself. And we also didn't really talk about mobility a whole lot, except for what items come with their own apps and reduced IT maintenance. So kind of coming back to our collaboration spectrum, we've gone through a lot of these different components. We didn't really talk about instant messaging and email, since we all pretty much know what those do and what those are good for. But, I really wanted to highlight social, team sites, intranet, document records management, and online storage, and what tools you should be using for what and when. So what I've kind of done is taken, some of those tools that we've just talked about and kind of put them in context with the collaboration spectrum, and when and where, in what applications they might be appropriate to be used. So I hope that this has been helpful in helping you all get up and running with Office 365, and to also help you figure out how you can get the most out of Office 365. But really at the core of this, it's understanding how you're going to use each feature and what's going to make sense to you, what pain points you have, and where you can derive some value out of these different features, since you're getting them all with the subscription. And then, defining your change management plan, I believe, is really key and critical to ensuring the success of what you're able to do. So, we're going to just kind of roll through. That's about all I have prepared for you all today. If you would like to keep the conversation going with us, we can definitely help you with figuring out what your roadmap would be, what your plan will be for getting the most out of Office 365. You can contact us directly, and you can also check out this recording. You can check out some other podcasts that we do that talk about Office 365 and productivity. We've got a lot of information out there, but more specifically, if you would like a more tailored conversation around specific circumstances within your organization and how we can shed some light or bring some of our experiences to bear in helping you make some of those decisions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We would love to continue the dialogue. And then the last piece that I want to share with you all is that with the rise of the next-gen intranets, we have also been working on a turnkey intranet of our own. And if that is something that might be of interest to you, especially as you're looking to figure out how to get the most out of Office 365, please plan on attending our webinar next week on March 30th at 1 p.m., where we will be discussing more about the one-window workplace turnkey intranet. And this intranet runs on Office 365, and it already integrates a lot of the features that we've been discussing in this presentation. So with that, I will check and see if there are any other questions that we can field with just the last few minutes that we've got remaining here. So we do have a question of what should you use Yammer for versus email? We still don't really use our newsfeed, and I'm honestly not sure why the newsfeed and Yammer should be used. Some of our leadership also think it's a waste of time. So one of the use cases that we've actually used Yammer for is for our resource management. So we used to have a weekly meeting where a bunch of our folks within Portal Solutions, we'd all get together and discuss resourcing ebb and flow. So what individuals were putting on what project, when a certain project will end, when a portion of a project will start and we may need a certain resource. And we'd have this 1-hour conversation weekly about kind of the movement of all the different individuals. And so actually what we did is we took a Yammer group and we created a Yammer group for resourcing. And what we all do now is if we have a need, if we have some changes that we're making, we post something in the newsfeed. And I have notifications for it. We all have notifications for it. It's something that I check very regularly. And we started to find that we were working so much more in real time that we didn't even need the meeting anymore. And so one of the things it did is it actually freed up an hour of my week. So I no longer have that meeting. We don't do the meeting anymore because for the most part we all exchange information through Yammer and our newsfeed group in Yammer to exchange all the ebb and flow. And so in that case it's going to everyone who needs to see it. But I don't have to think about an email. I don't have to think about, who should be included or not. But all the right people are getting informed, and it's actually freed up some time in my day. So, it's really kind of figuring out different levels of communication, different ways that you're exchanging information. I think knowledge base or Q&A is also a really great use case. So any situation where you have some knowledge sharing or people want to find out what's the most recent project you've done with X, who is an expert in Y, those are really great things to use Yammer for, because you'll cast a much wider net than you would with email, and the responses that you get back from a bunch of different people may really be very enlightening for a much wider audience than if you had limited it to a smaller distribution group. So I definitely think there are some really great use cases, and especially if you embed a Yammer feed in with a document or with a document library or with a particular knowledge base, having those contextual conversations in line with content can be really powerful and useful. And so then we have another question on how do you move groups files into SharePoint libraries, and can you manage group files with metadata? So group file libraries are very similar to a OneDrive for Business. Again, we're kind of still leveraging the SharePoint service for document management. I have not actually instituted any information management policies or enabled managed metadata onto a group file. So I'm not sure to the extent with which you can extend the SharePoint document management capabilities into group file libraries. But you can't, there's no real great way of moving groups files into SharePoint libraries unless you get a migration tool that helps you facilitate some of that movement. What I'm hearing from Microsoft and what I think we're going to see in the next 6 months or so will be some greater integration between SharePoint team sites and the groups, because that's definitely an area where Microsoft sees that there's a lot of confusion and that a lot of individuals are having trouble figuring out how and when to use what. But great question. I've been grappling with this one myself as well. All right. Well, thank you. We did go over about 5 minutes. I really appreciate everyone's time, and thank you for listening to us. I hope that this has been helpful to you. And with that, I will say I hope you have a great afternoon, and I hope that you have fun out there working with Office 365. Thank you.